بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In our previous session, we discussed the topic of organ donation. And we said that there are mainly two views when it comes to organ donation. We said the first are those scholars that say it is permissible to donate your organs to anyone, whether the recipient is a Muslim or not, whether their life depends on my organ or not. And then we went over the second view, which are those scholars that say you can only donate your organ to a Muslim if the Muslim's recipient, if his life depends on my organ. Only then I can write in my will that my organ is to be donated after I die to that person. And we mentioned the first argument for the second view. Inshallah, in this session I will mention the second argument. The second argument that some scholars have mentioned for why it is not allowed to donate my organs to just about anyone or a Muslim unless his life depends on it is a very interesting and fine argument. It's a very fine point. And I have seen that out of the scholars, As-Sayyid al-Sistani, hafidhahullah, he mentions this argument in specific. What As-Sayyid al-Sistani says, why he has reservations about donating organs after we die, is that he says, medically speaking, when is it acceptable to donate my organs? If I want my organs to be donated to someone after I die, medically speaking, there are two conditions for that. Number one, I have to be dead, obviously, because I'm writing in the organ donor registry, I'm writing in my will that after I die, take my organs. So number one, I have to be dead. And number two, condition number two is my organs have to be alive. Or else if my organs are dead, they're useless. So I have to be dead, but my organs have to be alive. And usually when the human being dies, very quickly his organs also die. They become useless. You can't donate them. I've researched it on the internet, and I've asked a few doctors. They say that the window for how long the organs can survive after someone dies is anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. So if someone dies in a car accident, if they die in their house, usually by the time they're taken to the hospital, the organs will be useless. So usually most people that end up donating their organs are those individuals that are declared brain dead while they are in the hospital. Because like we said, for someone to donate their organs, number one, they have to be dead. Number two, their organs have to be alive. How do you have that situation? It seems like a paradox. I have to be dead, but my organs have to be alive. Now this paradox is solved by someone that is brain dead. Because technically when I'm brain dead, doctors consider me as dead, but my organs are alive. So this is a perfect situation for my organs to be donated. So that's why most people, when their organs are donated, if they write in the organ registry, donor registry, if they write it in their will that they want their organs to be donated after they die, it's usually done when they are declared brain dead in the hospital. They're placed on the ventilator, the life support. Only then the organs can be taken and donated to a person that needs it. So when someone is declared brain dead, medically speaking, doctors consider this person as dead. He's dead. He's just like someone that has, is completely dead. So this makes him a perfect candidate to take his organs because he's dead, but his organs are alive. Now, what's the problem here? Sayyid al-Sistani says, the problem is, Islamically, he is not considered as dead. Someone that is brain dead, according to Sayyid al-Sistani and many ulama, this person is still alive. His heart is pumping, his lungs are working, even though it's being done by a ventilator. The point is, he's not dead, he's still alive. So Sayyid Sistani says, since he is still alive, if that person wrote in his will, take my organs after I die, you can't take his organs because he's still alive. And in fact, he says if you do go and take his organs, his vital organs like his lungs or his hearts, you'll end up killing him. This is a type of murder, Sayyid Sistani says. You have to leave him until he naturally dies, fully dies, or until you can no longer pay the bills and he'll forcibly will be taken off the ventilator. So Sayyid Sistani says, while he is brain dead, he's still alive. You can't take the body organs. When can you take them? Once he's completely dead. What's the problem? Once he's completely dead, we said his organs will be useless. So when his organs stop working, and this is where Sayyid Sistani says, technically he's dead now Islamically. It's too late now. You can't take his organs. So Sayyid Sistani says that when you're brain dead and your organs are useful, you can't take the organs, since that person is still alive Islamically. And after he dies and you can't take his organs because he's dead, his organs will be useless. So when his organs are useful, you can't take them because he's alive. When he is dead, they're useless. So Sayyid Sistani says the reason why we say organ donation is haram is because usually the only time that we can benefit from that dead person's organs is when he's brain dead. And when he's brain dead, it's not allowed to take. We're not allowed to take his organs because he's still alive. We'll be killing him by taking his vital organs. And after that, it's useless. So even if we said it's halal, there's really no application for it. I mean, the only time where it's usable, his organs, is when he's alive. And we can't take his organs when he's alive. So that's why Sayyid Sistani says the entire discussion of organ donation is useless most of the times, because it's only useful to take the organs of that person when that person is brain dead. And when he's brain dead, Islamically he's alive, you can't touch his organs. After he dies, his organs will be useless. So that's why Sayyid Sistani says it's haram before he's dead, and after that it's futile. So there isn't any real practical application. There are some rare times when you can, but it's very rare. So this is the second argument of the second opinion. Those that say organ donation is haram unless a Muslim's life depends on it. So obviously if a Muslim's life depends on it, then every haram will become halal, because saving another Muslim's life is more important than anything else. So even if that person is on the ventilator and he wrote in his will that you can only give my organs after I die, and it would be kind of like killing that person, but since we're saving another person's life, a Muslim's life, all of that becomes okay, because it outweighs the importance of keeping this person on the ventilator. So this is the discussion about organ donation, and now that it's clear, I'll move on inshallah to the next discussion. The next discussion is about autopsy, and it's very related to organ donation. Performing autopsy on a dead individual or post-mortem examination of a body, is it allowed or is it prohibited in Islam? Now when it comes to performing an autopsy, there is almost a consensus between the scholars that performing an autopsy on a Muslim body, if the person that we want to perform the autopsy on is a Muslim deceased, there is almost a consensus that it is haram, it is prohibited to perform an autopsy on that dead Muslim unless there is a compelling reason to do so. Now what is considered a compelling reason? I'll get to that in a few minutes inshallah. But the essential law is that it's haram to perform autopsy on a Muslim's body. Now why? The reason is because performing an autopsy, it involves mutilating the body of that dead person. It involves many dissections, incisions, and many of the bones will be broken. And if anyone has seen a body after while the autopsy is being performed, it's a very, very disturbing scene. And because of this, scholars have said this is a violation of the sanctity of that person. So unless you have a very, very, very compelling reason, very strong reason to mutilate that body and cut those, those organs and cut the body up and dissect it and break those bones, it is haram. And there's a few ahadith that mention this. I mentioned some of them in the past class. I'll mention some other now. One hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يقول إياكم والمثل ولو بالكلب العقور. Imam Ali alayhi salam narrates from the Holy Prophet. He says, I heard the Holy Prophet say, beware of mutilating any body. It is haram, even if it's a body of a dog. So it is haram to mutilate the body. After someone dies, that person's body has sanctity, has honor, it should not be touched, and it should be buried in that way. And obviously, this is a form of mutilation, doing the autopsy. Another hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, one of the narrators asks our sixth Imam, he says, سألت أبا عبد الله عن رجل كسر عظم ميت. If someone breaks the bone of a dead person, the Imam said, حرمته ميتا أعظم من حرمته وهو حي. He says, the sanctity of a dead person is more than the sanctity of that person when he was alive. So that means, can you just go and break someone's bone if they're alive? No. When they're dead, it's a greater sin. Don't touch those bones, don't touch the body. So it's haram essentially to perform the autopsy because it requires the incisions and the dissections and the mutilation of the body. However, if there is a compelling reason to do so, scholars have said, if that reason outweighs the harm of mutilating the body, then it becomes halal, it becomes permissible. So what are some examples that have been discussed between the ulama, some exceptions to this rule? Number one, if the autopsy is done for educational purposes, is it acceptable or not? If we dissect the body organs to learn about the body, to learn about diseases, scholars have said it is permissible only if this autopsy, this educational autopsy, only if it contributes to saving lives in the future. If it contributes to saving lives in the future, then yes, fine, it's halal. What do we mean? What we mean by that, if by dissecting these body organs, studying them, that will help us in better understanding diseases, how to combat those diseases. It will help us to discover new medicines, and ultimately all that together, it will save many lives in the future. So if the autopsy, it's for just educational purposes, just to learn, if it's for that reason and it will lead ultimately in the future to saving lives, scholars have said only then it will become halal, it will become permissible for educational purposes. So that's the first example that scholars have mentioned. And there is a hadith by one of the narrators, his name was Ali ibn Yaqteen, a companion of the seventh Imam. Ali ibn Yaqteen says in one hadith, سألت العبد الصالح. He says, I asked Al-Abd al-Salih, Al-Abd al-Salih, the righteous servant. That was one of the nicknames of our seventh Imam because it was a time of taqiyya, they couldn't mention his name. So he says, I asked the seventh Imam, Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, عن المرأة تموت وولدها في بطنها. قال يشق بطنها ويخرج ولدها. He asked the seventh Imam about this situation. If a pregnant woman dies while there is a child in her stomach, what do? The Imam said, cut the stomach open, just like when they do C-sections, and take out the child, because the child is living, and then bury the mother. So based on this, we understand that the Imam, he allowed Ali ibn Yaqteen, he said it is acceptable to mutilate the body, to cut the stomach of this dead woman. Why? Because it involves saving another life of another human being. Because saving that child's life is more important than the sanctity of that body, than the harm of mutilation. Thus it's justified. We can cut the body the stomach open because we're saving another life. So based on this hadith, scholars have said, we understand if performing an autopsy, which it involves mutilation, incisions, dissections, if it will lead ultimately, not the same day, but ultimately, for the reasons I mentioned because of research purposes and combating diseases, if it will lead to saving other people's lives, then it will become acceptable. So this is the first exception that scholars have mentioned. For educational purposes, only if it leads to saving lives. Exception number 2. The second exception that has been mentioned by scholars, where it is acceptable, where it has been discussed if it is acceptable to perform autopsy, is for criminal purposes. To determine if there was a homicide, if there was a murder or not. And many times autopsies during this day, they are performed for this reason, to see was this person killed or was it a normal death. So is it acceptable to perform an autopsy to determine if there was a crime, there was homicide, there was a murder, or is it not acceptable? Now scholars have said it depends on what you can prove with that autopsy. We can't just give a blanket, general permission to do autopsies for criminal purposes. No, it depends on what can be proven by this autopsy. If scholars have said someone has been unjustly accused of a crime, so this person is found dead, and then another person is accused of killing this person. And it's possible we may think that this person may be unjustly accused of killing that person. And that person may face death penalty. Then the autopsy here, it can maybe prove the innocence of that person. And thus, ultimately, it will lead to saving his life, correct? He's accused of killing this person. By performing the autopsy, it's possible that we can clear him of this crime and clear him of the death penalty. So this autopsy can potentially save this person's life. Now it may not. It may actually prove that he is the killer. But it can potentially prove that he is innocent and ultimately save his life. Many scholars have said, here it is permissible to perform the autopsy because in the end it's leading to someone's life being saved. But however, if no one is accused, we just found someone dead in his apartment or in his house, and we want to try to find out if there was a crime or not, scholars here have disagreed. Some have said it is permissible to perform the autopsy to see if there was a crime or not. You see, the first exception we said, we know there is a crime. We don't know if it's this person. This person has been accused. Maybe he's been wrongly accused. So maybe this autopsy will save his life. But the second example is no. We don't know. Maybe he died of a natural cause. Maybe there was a crime. And we want to perform this autopsy to figure it out. And we want to hold, if there is a crime, we want to hold the killer responsible. Maybe we'll find clues as to why he was killed and who killed him, and we can hold the killer accountable. Now, like I said, some have said this is permissible because they have said finding the killer or finding out if there was a crime and holding the killer accountable is more important than the sanctity of that body. Because in the end, amongst a part of the sanctity of this body is to, a part of the sanctity of this person is to give him justice. And we can maybe only give him justice if we perform the autopsy. So in the end, it works better for this person's honor and dignity that has died, that by performing this autopsy, we can probably find out who the killer is and serve this person justice by holding that killer accountable. So even though we're mutilating his body, but it says for his own good. Yes, Brother Ali.
Does the oath have anything to do with this? Because, Thomas' understanding, the autopsy doesn't bring dishonor or disgrace to the person, especially in this kind of case where we're trying to find out how this person actually died. and if the culprit is actually the killer?
Well, you can't, Brother Ali, you can't deny that this is a violation of his sanctity. I mean, who would want his body to be cut up into pieces and his bones, his ribs broken? So you can't deny that this is something very disturbing, unpleasant. However, what you can argue for, we will do that for a greater cause. It's like someone that has a disease and, they say we have to amputate your hand or foot. It's not a pleasant thing to amputate his body part. But however, he says, I will accept this bad, this very hurtful and disturbing result, or this disturbing, amputation, because it's for a better cause. So you can't deny that it's something bad, that it's something that most human beings are, they find it repulsive, they find it very disturbing, just to look at the body just open and dissected, and it's very, very repulsive. So you can't deny that this is not, a violation of his dignity. It is, but however, if there is something else, another reason that outweighs that, then it becomes okay, because for the greater good we'll do it anyway. So because it does involve that violation, and it is a type of mutilation, and the Imams, they have prohibited us from mutilating the body, then you need a very, very, compelling, powerful, strong reason that overweighs this, act of mutilation. So like I said, some scholars, they have said yes, to find, for criminal purposes, to find the killer, the murderer, it is okay to do the autopsy, because finding the killer is more important than the mutilation. But other scholars like Sayyid Sistani, I've seen he has a fatwa that says no. For criminal purposes, we're not allowed to perform autopsy. Why? He says because we can't be certain. How can we say for sure that finding the killer is more important, outweighs the sanctity or the harm of mutilation? It may not. We have to be certain, we have to be sure that it outweighs. Sayyid Sistani says, I can't be certain that it outweighs. So as long as I can't be certain it outweighs, I can give the fatwa for it to be permissible. So there is a disagreement on the criminal purposes of autopsy. This is the second exception. And the third and final exception that has been discussed between scholars is for diagnostic purposes. We just want to find out why he died. We found him dead in his apartment. Was it a drug overdose? Was it a heart attack? We don't think there was criminal purposes. No, we just want to see why he died. I've heard in the news many times, especially certain celebrities or important people, they're found dead in their houses, and they want to do an autopsy just to see why he died. Usually there isn't any suspicion for crime. It's just for, informational reasons, just to diagnose what the cause is. Or sometimes I have heard stories of miscarriages or stillbirths when the child dies in his mother's womb, and it's a complete child in the later stages, right before delivery, the child dies. And sometimes after the mother delivers the dead baby, they want to see why did the child die, so they perform an autopsy so that it won't happen the second, third time. Here, most scholars, they have said it is not permissible to perform the autopsy just to diagnose why he died, for the same reason we mentioned, because that is not a more important reason, that does not outweigh the sanctity of the body. Let him die on the Day of Judgment, inshallah we'll find out. Let him have a peaceful burial, let his body be intact and untouched, and we don't have to find out why he died. Even if there is a reason, a good reason, we're not sure that it will outweigh the harm of mutilation. So basically, most scholars have said, to summarize, that if it ultimately leads, the autopsy, to saving a person's life, it's okay. If it doesn't, most scholars have said it's not allowed. Some scholars have said to find the killer and serve this dead person justice, it's also allowed, even though we're not saving someone's life, but we're serving justice to this dead body. So at the end, it's there's much disagreement about performing autopsy on a Muslim body. Any questions, Brother Ali?
Yes. What if the killer, the cause of death for this prematurely born child, if researching that could save future babies? Let's say it's a congenital heart defect, and if the doctors had done some other treatment which kept a valve open or something, it would have saved the baby's life. And knowing that from an autopsy, maybe they could use that to save, another baby with similar traits in the parents or something.
Yes.
Would that then be permissible?
Yes, that would fall under the first exception that I mentioned, performing an autopsy for research purposes, educational purposes. If it ultimately leads to saving other babies' lives, then yes, it would become permissible according to all scholars. So all of this was pertaining autopsy on a Muslim dead body. What about if the body is non-Muslim? Now, if the body is non-Muslim, all scholars have agreed if the person is from Ahlul Dhimma, the people of the book that live under a Muslim country, it's not allowed, because it's the same, or I won't say it's not allowed, the same laws that we mentioned about the Muslim body will apply to Ahlul Dhimma, meaning it's not allowed unless it will lead to saving a person's life. So the Ahlul Dhimma will be just like what we said about a Muslim body. Now, what about non-Ahlul Dhimma, non-Muslims? If a non-Muslim, a kafir, is not from Ahlul Dhimma, they are living in their own countries. Here there's a lot of disagreement between the scholars. Some have said it's not allowed, since the body of a non-Muslim, of a kafir, if he's not Ahlul Dhimma, the body doesn't have sanctity. And since the body doesn't have sanctity, then, why would it be haram to perform the autopsy on that dead body? So this is what some scholars have said. Other scholars have said no. Muslim, non-Muslim, even a kafir, his body has sanctity. Why? Because every body has been given divine sanctity by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they refer to a verse in the Quran where Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah says, we have honored the children of Adam. Basically, we have honored human beings. So Allah has given every human being honor, dignity. So even this kafir, after he dies, he's a human being. Allah has given him honor, dignity, sanctity. We can't just come and mutilate that body just for no apparent reason. So likewise, there has to be a compelling reason. Like we said, it has to lead to saving someone else's life, or else it becomes haram. But then again, the scholars that have said it's halal, they have said, we don't have enough proof from the hadith or the verses that a kafir's body has sanctity, has dignity and honor. And then they refute this verse, they refute this argument that some scholars refer to this verse where Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. They say that what this verse is saying, that initially Allah has given honor to everybody, to every human being, as long as that person does not deprive himself of that honor. You see, it's like a criminal who is being incarcerated, or he's being taken to death penalty. He's about to get killed, executed for death penalty. It's like that person says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah has given me honor, even though I've committed the crime. Allah has given me honor, you can't kill me. What do we apply? We tell him, look, God gave you that privilege, that honor. You deprived yourself from that honor when you committed that murder, correct? So they say this isn't a general verse for all times and all situations. No. When you're born, Allah has given you, that's the default state. Allah has given you honor and dignity unless you revoke that honor, unless you deprive yourself of that honor. So these scholars have said, when a child is born, he's born with the fitrah, the innate disposition, the innate inherent position of the human being, and that is for him to believe in Allah, the state of believing in God and believing in morality, this is divinely placed in the human being, in his fitrah. If he disbelieves in Allah, then obviously he'll be deprived certain rights and privileges. And we have a hadith from the Holy Prophet where he says, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدْ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every human being is born on the fitrah. He's born with the right aqa'id, the correct beliefs in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأَبَوَاهُ يُهَوِّدَانِهِ أَوْ يُنَصِّرَانِهِ أَوْ يُمَجِّسَانِهِ. It's his parents, meaning the upbringing, the environment, that alters that innate nature that makes him, as the hadith says, a Christian or a Jew or a person that is a Zoroastrian, a Majus. Or else that child is born pure with that dignity and honor. The environment is the one that may deprive him of that honor by playing and altering with his mind. So if a person disbelieves in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, disbelieves in the true message, that person is depriving himself from certain rights and privileges. So these scholars have said that we are allowed to perform the autopsy on that body because there is no dignity, there is no honor to that body, as long as he deprived himself from the initial innate honor and dignity that Allah has given him by being a kafir. And there is no other hadith or verse that we have that proves the honor for the dead person, for the dead body. For a Muslim, we have many hadith, we mentioned them. But for a kafir, a non-Muslim, we don't have enough proof. 1 second, Brother Ali. Yes, well, go ahead, Brother Ali.
Well, could it be argued that because there weren't that many non-Muslims, that's why there's not that many hadith at the time of the Imams?
Well, yes. That's one possibility, right? Another possibility is there's no hadith because they don't have dignity. The point is, if we want to prove that they have dignity, the kuffar, after they die, their body can't be touched, we need proof. We can't just say, yeah, you can't touch the body, you can't. Why would it be haram for me, if I'm a medical examiner, a forensic doctor, for example, why would it be haram for me to mutilate that body, since there is no hadith prohibiting? Now, some scholars have said that Imam Ali said it is haram to do muthla, إياكم والمثلى ولو بالكلب العقور. It's haram to mutilate the body, even if it's a dog. So if it's haram to mutilate the body of the dog, obviously a kafir is a human being, so it will also be haram. But scholars have refuted this argument because they have said by mutilation in this hadith, muthla in the Arabic language, what is meant is it's when someone mutilates another body out of revenge as a crime. This is what the Arabs would do when they would kill someone in the battle. They would mutilate the body out of vengeance, out of hatred, out of revenge. So that's the muthla, the mutilation that the Imam is saying is haram. But if we do it for medical purposes, that's not really what the Imam is speaking about. So there wouldn't be any compelling reason. We don't have any reason to say that it is haram to commit the autopsy, even if it's just for a diagnosis. We want to see why the kafir died. Or it's for research purposes, but it won't lead to saving lives. It will lead to, for example, enhancing the life of the human being. It won't lead to saving the life, but it will lead to enhancing the life of certain human beings. So why would it be haram here? For the Muslim, we have many hadiths. The sanctity of the Muslim is more when he's dead than when he is alive. But when the person is dead, there isn't enough proof. Now this is obviously these group of ulama. There are some ulama that say no, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ proves the dignity all human beings, even if they're kafir. So there is disagreement on this issue. Now some scholars have also said that if we say it is haram to perform autopsy on the kafir, just like the Muslim, however, if the kafir himself, before he died, he gave permission, then it becomes halal. Or if it is acceptable in his religion, this is a Christian, it's a Jew, it's a whatever, a Zoroastrian, and a Hindu, a Buddhist. If it is acceptable in his religion, then fine, it's allowed for a Muslim to do that autopsy on his body, even if we said it's haram just like a Muslim, but since his religion permits it, then it becomes halal. So now that we understand the ahkam, the laws of autopsy on the Muslim, on the non-Muslim body, there is just one final discussion that has to do with autopsy that I have to mention. Inshallah, I will end after that. And that is the Diya. If a forensic scientist, a forensic doctor, if a medical examiner performs the autopsy on the deceased person for educational purposes, to save human beings' lives or to save the life of the innocent person that has been accused. So in those instances where we said it is halal, it is acceptable to perform autopsy, if a Muslim doctor performed the autopsy, would he have to pay the diya, the blood money, or not? Here, there is a disagreement between the scholars. Some scholars have said no, he does not have to pay the diya. Others have said yes. So I'll begin with the first view. Those scholars that have said no, he does not have to pay the diya, they have given a few arguments. I'll mention two. Argument number one, they said, those instances where it's permissible, this doctor, what he's actually doing, essentially doing, is he is assisting in saving other people's lives because of the research that he's doing. And since Allah has permitted this mutilation because it's leading to other people's lives being saved, then there should be no diya because God has allowed him to do it. It doesn't make sense, they said, for Allah to say, yeah, go ahead, do it, save other people's lives, but then, oh, you have to pay all this money as a diya. Because they say diya is a fine, it's a penalty for, damaging the body. And it should not apply to someone that does it out of goodwill, for a good purpose, to save other people's life. Why am I being penalized for it? Why do I have to pay a fine when I'm doing it for a good purpose? So they say for this reason, there should be no diya. That's the first argument. The second argument that they raise is they refer us to many ahadith. If we go to the book of Wasa'il al-Shia, which is one of the books compiled by Al-Hurr al-Amili, he mentions all the ahadith about fiqh, jurisprudence. There are 8 ahadith, they say, 8 ahadith in one chapter of Al-Wasa'il, all about this situation. If a pregnant woman dies and there is a living child in her stomach. In all of these 8 ahadiths, the Imam say, cut the stomach and take the child out. But not in one hadith of these 8 did the Imam say that, look, you have to pay the diya after you do that because you're cutting, you're creating this incision in the stomach, you're cutting the stomach, then you have to pay the diya. In fact, in some of these ahadith, the Imam says, make sure that you stitch the stomach after you cut it. So the Imam isn't disregarding, the sanctity of this woman, of this pregnant woman. Cut the stomach open, take out the child, and then stitch it. But nowhere does the Imam say, pay the diya. So since the Imam does not say pay the diya, this shows us that if we were to dissect the body of a dead person for a greater purpose, for saving lives, then there is no diya. So that situation in these ahadith is just like our situation. The womb, the stomach of the mother is being cut to save the child's life. The Imam didn't say pay a diya. In our situation, we're performing autopsy to save lives. Thus, there should not be any diya. So this is the second argument for not paying a diya. As we mentioned, the second argument is that since in these ahadith, the Imams never address the diya, then in our situation, there's no diya as well, because it's the same thing. So this is the first view. The first view that says there is no diya. The second view says no, there is a diya. And they refer to a hadith, these scholars, by Abdullah ibn Maskan. Abdullah ibn Maskan an Abi Abdullah. He narrates a hadith from the 6th Imam. في رجل قطع رأس الميت. قطع رأس الميت. He asked the sixth Imam, Abdullah ibn Maskan, who was one of the close, trustworthy, reliable companions of the sixth Imam. He says, if someone beheads a dead body, dead person, cuts the head. So, what's the law pertaining to that? The Imam says, عليه الدية. He has to pay the diya. لأن حرمته ميتا كحرمته وهو حي. He says because the sanctity of this dead body is like the sanctity when he's alive. If you would have cut the head when he was alive, if you would have beheaded that body, there would be a diya, of course, for killing that person. Now there is a diya as well. That's why the ulama give a fatwa. They say any time, there's other ahadith as well, any type of dismemberment of the body, any type of mutilation, there will be a diya, because the imams tell us that there is sanctity when the person is dead as well. So if I injure the dead body, I break a bone, I cut the body, I dismember the body, there will be a diya. So in the same way that when he was alive there was a diya, there is a diya that will apply now. So what the scholars say is when a doctor performs an autopsy, this will involve many bones being broken, many incisions, dissections, mutilation of the body, and all of that will involve the diya, just as the Imam answered Abdullah bin Maskan. And then they come to the second point. They say this, that just because God permitted it, this is what one of the arguments of the first side, of the first group that said there is no diya. They said God has permitted it. It doesn't make sense. God says it's okay to do it, and then He says pay a diya. They reply back, these scholars of the second opinion that say you have to pay diya, they say just because God permitted it, and the medical examiner is doing it out of goodwill, this doesn't mean that there is no diya. Yes, it does mean that there is no sin. God has permitted it. I'm doing it out of goodwill. So it's not haram. In fact, you could receive ajr for it, because you're doing it out of goodwill. But it does not mean that there is no diya. Why? Because remember, the first group said diya is a fine, it's a penalty. Why penalize someone that's doing something out of goodwill? Correct? They say no. Who said that diya is a penalty? Diya is not a penalty. Diya is compensation for the damage that has been caused on the dead body. Thus, they say, even if you injure someone that's alive, if I injure that person accidentally, right? I break a bone, I injure the body, bruise the body, I, for example, do something where a body part is cut, severely cut or amputated. Now, in this situation, do I have to pay diya? Of course. Consensus between all ulama. If you accidentally harm someone, then you have to pay diya. Why? Why am I being penalized for doing something accidentally? The reply will be it's not a penalty. You're not being fined. You're not being punished. You caused damage to this person's body. You have to compensate the body, even if you did it accidentally. It's just like if I break someone's property accidentally, I will have to compensate that person. The human body is the same thing. If I cause damage to property, there is compensation. If I cause damage to a body, there is compensation. So this hadith from Abdullah ibn Maskan of the sixth Imam, it's saying just like when the human being is alive, there has to be compensation for the damage. Likewise, there has to be compensation for the damage when he's dead, because the hurma, the sanctity of a dead person, is like the sanctity of a person when he is alive. So, since this is a form of compensation, the medical examiner, even though he's doing it out of goodwill to save other people's lives, he's performing the autopsy, but what's in it for this poor deceased guy? You've completely damaged his body. I mean, you've broken so many bones, all these incisions, all this mutilation. Yes, we know you're doing it for a greater cause to save other people's life, but what's in it for this poor guy? His body is completely damaged now. Compensate him for it. It's like, for example, scholars have said, if you're running away for your life, and you have to intrude, someone's trying to kill you, you're running for your life, you have to intrude in someone's property and break some of his belongings. You can break those belongings, that property, because you want to save your life, but you have to compensate that person after that, don't you? Or another example they gave, if there is mass starvation, I'm starving, I'm going to die, and then I see food from another person. That person hasn't given me permission to eat his food. Can I eat it? Yes, I can eat it to save my life, but then I have to compensate that person if I had money. So just because God giving permission to do something doesn't mean there is no, financial compensation that I'll have to bear after that. So the doctor could do his job, but there will be a diya. However, some scholars have said there is a diya, but the medical examiner shouldn't pay it. Even though he's the one that broke the bones and caused all that damage, he shouldn't be the one that's paying the diya, because he's not doing it for his personal interest. He's doing it for the better interest of the public, of the general public. And thus, the Muslim treasury, or the marja', for example, of the time, because this is a matter that serves the interest of the Muslims in general, or the people in general, either the Muslim treasury, if there is a Muslim country, or the marja' should have to pay that diya. But others, no, they have said it's the doctor, because he's the one that is directly causing all this damage. He has to be the one that compensates for this damage. Yes, Brother Ali, go ahead.
I'm remembering Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah gives the story of the Baqarah, and Bani Israel bring back a person back to life. And it's very, very linked to other places in the Quran where it says, وَإِنَّمَا فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ. So could it be argued that because Qisas gives life, I mean, obviously not always in that type, like how Bani Israel experienced it, but at least, Bani Israel was about to go to a civil war, and this saved them because now one side has been pacified by getting the money or whatnot. In order to save lives, wouldn't it be more recommended at least to give the diya, the qisas, the blood money?
So basically what you're saying is perform the autopsy, save lives, but then give the diya?
Right, because now as Quran says, وَإِنَّمَا فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ.
Well, we can't really, this can't really be used as an argument to prove that the diya will apply, because this is too general, this verse. وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ. What this verse is meaning, what this verse is trying to say according to Mufassirin is, by performing qisas, the death penalty, or an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, this will be a deterrent from further crimes. So if a person knows that if I killed another person, there's going to be the death penalty, then obviously that will be a deterrent. So he won't commit the crime, so other lives will be saved. So this is what the verse is trying to say. Trying to relate it to our topic, the diya, it's not too clear, where you can't really use it as a very clear argument where you say pay the diya. Not really, because remember, qisas is the death penalty, or it's basically whatever's been done to the oppressed, you do it to the oppressor. So if you cut the hands, you cut their hands. This is what's meant by qisas. So it's not really speaking about diya. You can refer to you can rely on one of the two arguments that the first group mentioned, and that is where if God gave permission, then there should be no diya, even though the second group refuted that. Now whether we accept that, that's completely dependent on ijtihad. Or the second group of the second argument, where those 8 hadiths, none of them mention diya. That means there's no diya, or else the imam would have mentioned and then paid the diya. Even though the imam, he was aware of this, he was even basically mindful of that dead person by saying, make sure you stitch up the stomach. But why wasn't he mindful of the diya? Because remember, the diya will be spent on good causes for that dead person. We could give it as a sadaqah on that dead person, so that dead person will benefit from that diya. So why didn't the Imam mention the diya? That means there was no diya, because it involves saving another person's life. You can rely on this. But however, the second group of ulama, I have seen a refutation of that second argument too. And basically what they have said, the reason why the Imam didn't mention the diya in those 8 hadiths is because saving the life of the child serves the interest of the mother. And that's why they say, even if she was alive and the child maybe was having complications, wouldn't she voluntarily accept to perform C-section? She'll tell them, yes, please open my stomach, take him out, I don't want him to die. So even if she was alive, she would have said, cut my stomach. So obviously when she's dead, we're going to do the same thing, because it's her child. Obviously if she was alive, we were to ask her, should we cut your stomach and save the child, or should we just bury him with you and let him die? She would say, no, of course I want you to save him. So since it is serving her personal interest, she will get no diya. But in our situation, this poor guy who we're doing autopsy on, so that in the future people will be saved, he isn't really benefiting directly. So we have to give him the diya for the damages that we're causing to his body. So that's also a refutation that some ulama have mentioned to this second argument. But at the end, like we mentioned, we don't want to choose any sides, because we leave this up to the mujtahideen, to the maraji'. Each marji' based on his understanding and his ijtihad will choose the view that he will see most appropriate. With this, I end my discussion about autopsy. Inshallah, next session we will move on to a new mas'ala, a new discussion. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.